The drums of Egypt echoed through the night, as Hebrew slaves groaned under the crushing weight of their burdens, the overseer's whip falling without mercy. Yet amidst this profound oppression, a child floated on the Nile's waters, utterly unaware of the monumental destiny that awaited him to become the liberator of his people. This is the timeless chronicle of slavery and redemption, of a sovereign God who defied a mighty empire, of a man called to lead a nation, of a people forged in the crucible of the wilderness, and of an eternal promise that would transcend generations. The gods of Egypt proved powerless to stop him. The vast seas could not hinder his path. The greatest armies could not defeat him. For when God chooses to set his people free, no earthly force can stand in his way. God's people were not meant to be slaves. How did a man born into bondage defy a pharaoh? How did an insurmountable sea cleave in two? How did a nascent nation journey for 40 years through a barren wilderness and yet survive? This is not merely an ancient tale. It stands as a timeless warning, a profound message, and a revelation for all ages.
Let my people go!
As the years unfolded, the descendants of Israel multiplied exponentially within Egypt. What had once been a refuge in the days of Joseph, son of Jacob, now transformed into a cruel prison of oppression. A new pharaoh ascended to the throne, one who knew nothing of Joseph or the covenant God had made. He gazed upon the burgeoning Hebrew population with profound fear, declaring his apprehension.
Should war erupt, the Hebrews might ally with Babylon's enemies and escape our grasp. By order of the great king Nebuchadnezzar, all Hebrews are henceforth declared slaves of Babylon.
The sons of Jacob, the very descendants of Abraham, the people of the promise, were now prisoners in Egypt. Yet paradoxically, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. Pharaoh's dread intensified.
If these Hebrews continue to multiply, Babylon will lose all control. We must act.
We must find a way to stop them. Their numbers grow too great.
A new, more horrifying edict was proclaimed, one that filled every Hebrew home with anguish. Every Hebrew boy born was to be cast into the Nile. Only the girls would be permitted to live. But amid the mourning and despair within a humble home of the tribe of Levi, a child was born, a child destined to alter the course of history.
I will not let them take you.
One who would later be named Moses.
They will have to take my life first.
His mother, gripped by an unyielding resolve not to let her son be killed, vowed to conceal him even if it cost her own life. For 3 agonizing months, she hid the infant. Every cry, every slightest sound risked discovery and death. The day inevitably came when she could hide him no longer. So she made a desperate choice. She prepared a basket, sealing it meticulously with tar, and tenderly placed her son inside.
Mother, must we? Is there no other way for Moses?
Hush, child. It is God's will. He will be safe.
The mother, with profound faith, responded that she would place his life in God's hands. The basket bearing the precious cargo floated on the Nile's waters, navigating among reeds and even crocodiles, the very river where so many Hebrew children had perished. Yet this child remained untouched by death, for God had a divine purpose for him. Then Pharaoh's own daughter came to the river. She spotted the basket nestled among the reeds. When she opened it, the child cried, and compassion stirred in her heart. Recognizing him as a Hebrew child, she nevertheless decided to raise him as her own. And so the very child destined to free Israel was raised in Egypt's royal palace, afforded a royal education, and trained as a prince. Yet despite his princely attire and Egyptian upbringing at heart, he was no Egyptian. He was a Hebrew. One day he would discover this truth in the most painful of ways. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's house, surrounded by gold and grandeur, taught the sciences of Egypt, and schooled in the art of war. But though he dressed as a prince, his soul belonged to another people. Destiny called him, and the day of his painful awakening finally arrived. One day, Moses went to visit his own people, the Hebrews. He walked among the slaves, observing their calloused hands and faces streaked with sweat and tears. Then he witnessed a horrifying sight, an Egyptian overseer savagely whipping a Hebrew slave again and again with utter mercilessness. Fury burned within Moses. He stepped forward, seeing no other witnesses, as the overseer continued his brutal assault. Then Moses acted. He raised his hand, and the Egyptian fell dead. A brief silence followed. The Hebrew slave fled, but Moses knew the gravity of what he had done. He knew his life would never be the same. He buried the body in the sand and fled the scene. The very next day, as Moses attempted to intervene in the fight between two Hebrews, one glared at him with scorn and demanded to know who had appointed him their judge, threateningly asking if he intended to kill him as he had killed the Egyptian. Fear gripped Moses. The news had spread. When it reached Pharaoh's ears, the king ordered his death. Moses fled the palace where he was raised, fled the people he was meant to free, fleeing aimlessly, until he reached the distant land of Midian. And there his life took a new, unexpected turn. In Midian, Moses found refuge. Years passed.
May you
He
find
married
peace
Zipporah,
and a new
the
home
daughter
here
of
among
Jethro,
us.
the priest
You
of
are
that
welcome
land.
in Midian.
For 40
May your
years,
union be
he
blessed.
became a shepherd. The grandeur of his life in Egypt faded behind him, and the mission of his youth seemed to vanish into the desert sands. But God had not forgotten Moses. For one ordinary day on God's sacred mountain, fire called to him. As Moses led his sheep along Mount Horeb's slope, he saw it a bush ablaze with fire, yet miraculously unconsumed.
Moses! Moses!
Moses drew near, and suddenly the fire spoke.
Here I am.
Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground.
Moses fell to his knees and hid his face.
I am the
for
God
he
of
knew
your
who
fathers,
spoke.
the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob.
Moses trembled, but God was not finished. I have seen my people suffering in Egypt. I have heard their cries, and I have come to deliver them to a land flowing with milk and honey.
I will be with you. And this is your sign. When you have brought the people out of Babylon,
Therefore I send you to Pharaoh. You will bring my people out of Egypt. Moses lifted his gaze. The fire still blazed, and the voice echoed in his mind. But in his heart, fear paralyzed him. He questioned his own worthiness, asking who he was to confront Pharaoh, who he was to lead Israel out. God reassured him, I will be with you. And this is your sign: when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship me on this mountain. When Moses inquired about God's name to tell the Israelites, the divine reply came, I am who I am. This is what you shall say to Israel, I am has sent me to you. Moses fell to his knees. He who had fled Egypt, who had left everything behind, who possessed no power or army, now bore an impossible mission. But he also held an unwavering promise: God himself would go with him, and Egypt would come to know the power of Israel's God. Moses descended from Mount Horeb. The fire still burned in his mind, the echo of God's voice still thundered in his heart. Yet the task God had given him seemed unthinkable. He was but a shepherd, no leader, no eloquent speaker, no warrior. Now he must defy the mightiest king on earth. He confessed his inadequacy, explaining that he was not a man of words, that his tongue was slow, and his speech faltering. The Lord responded by asking who gave man his mouth, who made the mute speak, the blind see, asserting that it was he, the Lord. God then commanded Moses to go, promising to be with him and teach him what to say. Still, Moses pleaded for God to send someone else. Silence fell on the mountain, but God's resolve did not waver. Aaron, Moses' brother, would speak for him. and Moses was instructed to take his staff, for with it he would perform signs. And so Moses left the wilderness and returned to Egypt. The man who had fled as a fugitive now came back as God's messenger. With Aaron, he stood before Israel's elders and recounted all that God had spoken. The elders believed. They bowed and worshipped, for they knew God had not forgotten them. Moses and Aaron then entered Pharaoh's palace. The king's eyes burned with arrogance. The pillars of his throne were of gold and ivory. Egypt was the mightiest empire on earth, and these two men seemed insignificant before him. But Moses raised his staff and spoke with divine authority. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go that they may worship me in the wilderness." The vast hall fell silent. Then Pharaoh laughed. He scoffed, demanding to know who this Lord was, that he should obey his voice, declaring that he did not know their God, nor would he let Israel go. Pharaoh turned to his overseers, remarking that if the Hebrews had time to speak of freedom, they were not working enough. From that day forward, he decreed they would no longer be given straw for bricks. They would have to gather it themselves. Yet their quota of bricks would remain unchanged, with failure resulting in punishment. And so Israel's burden grew heavier. Hebrew overseers were whipped, the people despaired, and they turned against Moses, accusing him of promising freedom, only to worsen their suffering. Moses cried out to the Lord, questioning why God had allowed this, noting that since he had spoken to Pharaoh, the king's cruelty had deepened, yet deliverance still delayed. God responded that Moses would now witness what he would do to Pharaoh with a mighty hand. He would compel them to release his people. "I am the Lord," God declared, "the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. With an outstretched arm, I will bring them out of Egypt, and Egypt will know that I am the Lord." God gave Moses signs and wonders, and Moses returned to Pharaoh's palace, but this time he was not alone. He came with the power of Israel's God. Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh. Aaron boldly declared the Lord's command,
the God of the Hebrews,
"Let my people go,"
has sent me to say to you,
Pharaoh crossed his arms,
my
unmoved.
people go.
Aaron then cast his staff to the ground, and it miraculously became a serpent. Pharaoh's counselors recoiled, but the king merely smirked, nodding to his own sorcerers, implying that this was all their God could do. Egypt's magicians threw down their rods, and they too became serpents. But then Aaron's serpent devoured theirs. The priests trembled, yet Pharaoh hardened his heart, dismissing it as mere cheap sorcery, and reaffirmed his decision Israel would not go. And so God's judgment began to fall upon Egypt. Egypt had defied God. Pharaoh had hardened his heart, refusing to hear, refusing to bow. Now God would speak through judgment, not with words alone, but with signs Egypt would never forget. First plague. Moses and Aaron stood at the Nile's edge, the river of life, Egypt's pride. But now it would become its ruin. Moses proclaimed that this was the Lord's decree.
"I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood."
And the river turned crimson. Fish floated dead. A terrible stench spread across the land. Egyptians scrambled for water, but every spring, well, and stream became blood. Pharaoh, unimpressed, claimed his magicians could do the same, hardening his heart and refusing to free Israel. Second plague. Then the Lord instructed Moses to stretch out his hand, and frogs would overrun the land. Aaron lifted his staff, and from rivers, ponds, and all waters, frogs swarmed. They blanketed palaces, infested homes, leapt onto beds, and crawled into food. Egypt became a writhing swamp. Pharaoh finally relented, pleading with Moses to intercede with his God, to remove the frogs, promising to let the people go. Moses prayed, and the frogs died, their rotting carcasses choking the air. But when Pharaoh saw relief, he hardened his heart again and kept Israel enslaved. Third plague. The Lord then commanded Moses, "Strike the dust and it will become lice." Aaron struck the ground. Dust surged like a black cloud. When it settled, billions of lice crawled over every person and beast. Egyptians scratched in agony. The priests attempted to mimic the plague, but failed. One magician trembled, admitting that this was no mere trick, but the very finger of God.
Is the finger of
Yet Pharaoh ignored him, and Egypt suffered.
My Pharaoh, the people
Fourth
suffer
plague.
greatly. Perhaps it is time to reconsider.
Then came a dark haze, a deafening buzz. Swarms of flies blackened the sky, thousands, millions crawling into eyes and mouths. Pestilence reigned. But in Goshen, where Israel dwelt, not a single fly stirred. A desperate Pharaoh begged Moses to go worship his God,
Enough!
and to remain within
Tell
Egypt.
your God to take these flies away!
Only if you let my people go.
Pharaoh conceded, agreeing to let them go, but not too far. Moses prayed, and the flies vanished. But Pharaoh broke his word and hardened his heart once more. Fifth plague. The Lord declared that he would strike Egypt's livestock with a severe plague, but Israel's flocks would remain untouched. The very next day, Egypt's cattle fell dead, oxen, sheep, horses. Yet in Goshen, not a single animal perished. Pharaoh surveyed the carnage, yet still refused to free Israel, for his heart remained hardened. Sixth plague. Moses and Aaron took furnace soot and tossed it into the air. The ash became festering boils on Egyptian flesh. Painful sores covered their bodies. Egypt's own magicians could not even stand before Moses due to their afflictions. But Pharaoh would not yield. Seventh plague. Moses raised his staff and the sky turned black. Wind roared, then fell hail and fire entwined. Storms crushed fields. Trees were torn from their roots. Men and beasts died. Egypt had never seen such fury. Pharaoh cried out in terror, confessing his sin and pleading with Moses to intercede with his God to end the storm, promising to let them go. Moses prayed, and the hail ceased. But once more, Pharaoh hardened his heart. Eighth plague. The skies darkened again, not by clouds, but by locusts. Armies of insects devoured all that remained of the crops and vegetation. Egyptians watched in horror as the land vanished beneath a shroud of
I
destruction.
beg you, Moses, take this plague away from my people. We can bear no more.
Moses prayed, and wine swept the locusts away. But Pharaoh again broke his oath. Ninth plague. Moses stretched out his hand, and Egypt was swallowed by darkness, 3 days of total blackness with no sun and no flame. But in Goshen, Israel's children had light.
Go now, you and your people, but your livestock must stay.
Moses refused, declaring they would take everything with them.
I will not yield.
Pharaoh, enraged,
Let my
ordered
people
Moses
go.
out of his sight, vowing that if Moses ever saw his face again, he would die. Moses replied, "So be it. I will never see your face again." 10th and last plague. The final night arrived. Death drew near, and all Egypt would weep. Egypt knelt broken. Plagues had ravaged the land. Fields lay scorched, livestock, dead people drowned in despair. Yet one ultimate judgment remained. Egypt's darkest night was coming. God spoke to Moses, revealing he would bring one last plague upon Egypt, after which Pharaoh would finally drive them out. At midnight, God declared he would pass through Egypt, and every firstborn son would die, from Pharaoh's heir to the slave's child. But in Israel, God would make a distinction. That night would be the first Passover. God instructed his people. Moses explained that each family was to take an unblemished lamb, sacrifice it, and mark their doorposts and lintels with its blood.
The hour is upon us.
For
We must
judgment
eat
would
quickly
come, but the
and be
blood would
ready.
shield them. The Hebrews ate hastily, sandals on their feet, staffs in hand, ready to depart, ready for freedom's call. Night fell, and in the profound darkness, the angel of death descended. Then it happened at midnight, Egypt awoke to screams of horror. Pharaoh's firstborn was dead, the slave's firstborn was dead, the cattle's firstborn was dead. No Egyptian home was spared. Wails rose to the heavens. God's judgment had struck. Pharaoh, with a broken voice, almost a whisper, finally conceded.
Go!
Go, leave my people at once. Go worship your God as you demanded. Take your flocks, take all you own, but leave and pray for me too. And so after 430 years in Egypt, the children of Israel were free. The chains of slavery shattered, for God had heard their cries, and Egypt would never be the same. The final night in Egypt had passed. Israel, once slaves, now marched as a free nation. Men, women, children, from the youngest to the eldest, from the strongest to the frail. They carried their belongings, their flocks, and the gold and silver Egypt had given them, for Egypt desperately wanted them gone. Egypt wanted to forget. Egypt feared Israel's God. But the story was not over. Judgment had fallen, but the final battle still loomed. God did not leave them alone. By day, a pillar of cloud guided their path. By night, a pillar of fire lit their way. Moses led them forward. God's promise awaited. But their enemy was not finished. Pharaoh, realizing his mistake, cried out that they had let the Hebrews go, and that they must bring them back. He rallied his
cannot
army,
escape.
600 elite
Prepare the
chariots,
chariots.
thousands of
We will
soldiers,
pursue
Egypt's
them.
most feared horsemen. With fury burning in his heart, he pursued Israel. Israel marched on children, laughing, elders smiling. But suddenly screams erupted from the rear. Panic spread. Israel was trapped. Before them lay the Red Sea, behind them Pharaoh's army. Freedom seemed a mirage. The desert offered no escape. Fear clouded their hearts. Terror gripped their minds. Some cried out to Moses, questioning if he had brought them there to die if there were no graves in Egypt.
Is it because
But
there are no
Moses did not
graves in
waver,
Egypt
for
that you
Moses
have
knew
taken
what they
us
did
away
not.
to die in the wilderness?
He commanded them not to fear, to stand firm and witness the Lord's deliverance. The Egyptians they saw that day, he declared they would never see again. The Lord would fight for them, and they needed only to be still. God spoke to Moses, instructing him to lift his staff, stretch out his hand over the sea, and divide it so that Israel might cross on dry ground. Moses raised his staff, and the wind roared fierce, relentless, unstoppable. The waters split in two to the right, a towering wall of water. To the left, another wall. And between them, a path to freedom. Israel stared in awe.
Is this real?
One by one,
He
they
has
stepped
saved
forward.
us.
The ground was dry, the sea tamed by God's power. Children ran, elders wept as they walked, God's glory enveloping them. But the Egyptians were not done. After them, catch them, drag them back. Egypt's chariots charged into the sea. But the wheels, clogged with mud horses, stumbled, and panic surged among the soldiers. They cried out that the Lord was fighting for Israel, urging retreat. But it was too late. God spoke to Moses, instructing him to stretch his hand over the sea and let the waters return and swallow Egypt whole. Moses stretched out his hand. The winds shifted, the waters raged, and the sea crashed back into place. The mightiest army in the world was swallowed by the sea. Chariots vanished, horsemen dragged beneath the waves. Pharaoh watched his power drown before his eyes, and Israel stood upon the shore. The enemies they had feared were corpses floating in the water. Israel witnessed God's work, and in that moment they believed and raised their voices in praise. They sang of triumph, declaring they would sing to the Lord, for he had triumphed gloriously, casting horse and rider into the sea. The Lord was their strength and their song. He had become their salvation. Women danced, elders wept for joy, for on that day Israel ceased to be slaves. On that day Egypt was defeated. On that day God's glory blazed before all nations. Israel crossed the sea. Egypt faded behind them. But freedom was more than escape. God had not brought them out of Egypt just to be free. He brought them out to be His people. Yet before entering the promised land, they would receive His law, and at Mount Sinai, God would call them to an eternal covenant. 3 months after leaving Egypt, Israel reached the Sinai wilderness. They camped at the mountain's base, and God spoke to Moses, instructing him to ascend and relay His words to Israel. They had witnessed what He did to Egypt, how He carried them on eagle's wings.
People of Israel,
If they obeyed His
bring you the
voice and
words of
kept
the
His
Lord.
covenant, they would be
He has
His
given us
treasured
His law.
possession, a kingdom of priests.
We
a
will
holy
do
nation.
everything the Lord has said.
Moses obeyed. He descended and gathered the people, telling them all the Lord had said. And with one voice they answered that they would do all the Lord had spoken. On the 3rd day, Mount Sinai quaked. Thunder split the sky, lightning flashed, a thick cloud shrouded the peak, and the blast of a heavenly trumpet shook the air. Israel trembled. Elders fell to their knees, children hid in their mothers' arms. The Lord had descended in fire. Smoke engulfed the mountain, and God's voice boomed like a roar that shook the earth. He declared Himself as the Lord their God, who brought them out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He commanded them to have no other gods before Him, to make no idols nor bow to them, not to misuse His name, to remember the Sabbath, and keep it holy, to honor their father and mother, not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to lie, and not to covet what belonged to their neighbor. The people heard God's voice, their hearts quaked in terror. They retreated from the mountain, then pleaded with Moses that he should speak to God on their behalf and tell them what He said, lest
Fear
God
not,
speak to them
for the
directly
Lord is with us.
and they die.
He has shown us His
Moses
path,
reassured them
and He
not
will
to fear
guide us to
explaining that
safety.
God had come to test them, so that His fear might dwell in them and prevent them from sinning. Thus God gave His law to Israel, a sacred covenant to make them His holy people. But the people's hearts were not yet ready for perfect obedience, and while Moses lingered on the mountain, Israel would face their first great trial. Moses ascended the mountain for 40 days and nights. God gave him the tablets of the law inscribed with His own finger. But in the camp below, the people's faith unraveled. They questioned Moses' whereabouts and who would lead them now. Aaron, unsure how to respond, asked them what they wanted him to do, and they demanded he make them a god to lead them, for they did not know what had become of Moses. Aaron gathered the people's gold and forged a golden calf. He then declared that this was their God, O Israel, who brought them out of Egypt. Israel ran wild. They danced, feasted, and bowed to the calf. But on the mountain, God saw it all. He commanded Moses to go down, for his people had sinned, turning aside quickly from the path. God proposed to destroy them and make a great nation out of Moses instead. Moses interceded, pleading that if God destroyed them, the nations would say He had freed them only to kill them in the desert. He begged God to forgive them and not wipe them out. God heard Moses' plea, but Israel's sin would not go unpunished. Moses descended the mountain. What he saw filled his heart with rage. The people danced around the idol, bowing to the calf. They had so quickly forgotten their God, who had freed them from Egypt, and whose voice they had heard on the mountain. Moses raised the stone tablets and shattered them at the mountain's base. He seized the golden calf, melted it in fire, ground it to dust, mixed it with water, and made the people drink it. Moses then cried out for all who stood with the Lord to come to him. The sons of Levi rallied to Moses, and God's judgment fell on the idolaters. That day, 3,000 men died. The people's hearts were broken. Moses climbed the mountain again, and once more he pleaded for his people. He implored the Lord to show him His glory, having found favor in his eyes. God responded that he would cause his goodness to pass before him. But Moses could not see his face and live. God renewed his covenant, gave Moses new stone tablets, and his glory blazed upon the mountain. From that day, Israel was no longer just freed slaves. They were a holy nation, a people set apart for God. But their journey was far from over. Before entering the Promised Land, they would face their greatest trial yet. Israel had received the law. They had seen Sinai cloaked in fire and heard the voice of the living God. But God did not call them just to give commands. He wanted to dwell among them. And so he ordered his earthly sanctuary built. He instructed Israel to build him a tabernacle, exactly as he showed them, using gold, silver, bronze, fine linen, and purple acacia wood, and precious stones for his glory would fill this place. Moses gathered the people. Israel brought their offerings. Artisans were filled with divine skill. Curtains were woven, the ark crafted the lampstand, forged the altar consecrated. When the tabernacle stood complete, God descended upon it. A cloud covered the sanctuary, and the Lord's glory filled it so fully that not even Moses could enter. By day, the cloud shielded the camp. By night, fire lit Israel's way. When the cloud lifted, the people marched.
Thirst.
God led them, God was with them. But though God dwelled among them, Israel's hearts remained rebellious, and their truest test was about to begin. The people marched from Sinai. The Promised Land was near. But the path ahead would test their faith, for though God had brought Israel out of Egypt, Egypt still lived in them. And soon their unbelief would bring judgment. They had barely journeyed into the wilderness when some began to grumble about having no water, questioning if Moses had brought them there to die of thirst. Moses cried out to God, and God made water flow from the rock. But soon after, they complained again about having no food, reminiscing about the bread and meat they had in Egypt. God sent manna from heaven each morning, bread that covered the ground like dew, and each night quail filled the camp to feed them. Yet the people remained unsatisfied. They kept grumbling, kept rebelling, until the day their unbelief finally condemned them. Israel reached the very edge of the Promised Land, one step from entering, one step from claiming God's promise. Moses sent 12 spies to scout the land. For 40 days they traversed Canaan. When they returned, they carried the land's fruit, but also a report filled with fear. They confessed the land was good, but its people were giants. Their cities fortified their walls impossible to breach. They declared they could not conquer it, that they would be devoured. The people listened, and fear consumed their hearts. That very night, Israel rebelled against God, proposing to return to Egypt, refusing to enter the Promised Land. Then Joshua and Caleb courageously declared for the people not to fear, asserting that if the Lord delighted in them, he would give them this land, and urging them not to rebel against him. But the people threatened to stone them. At that moment, God's glory descended. He expressed his indignation. How long will this people despise me? They have seen my glory, they have seen my signs, yet still they do not trust. Therefore I swear you will not enter the land. Your generation will perish in the wilderness. Your children will inherit it, but you will wander 40 years. Moses fell to his knees. The people wailed in despair. But judgment had been spoken. They would never enter the Promised Land. Yet rebellion was not over. In the wilderness, a man named Korah rose against Moses. Korah and 250 men challenged his authority, questioning Moses' appointment as ruler, asserting that all were
Hear
holy,
now, you sons
and
of
asking
Levi.
why he exalted
Is it a
himself
small
above
thing
God's
to you
people.
that the God of Israel has separated
Moses
you?
fell face down, and God spoke
Lord
judgment.
lives,
Tomorrow
and as
the
your
Lord
soul
will
lives,
show who is
if these
his.
men die the common death of
The
all
next
men,
day,
then
Korah
the
and his
Lord has not
followers
sent
stood
me.
before the tabernacle. The crowd gathered, and Moses spoke. If these men died, as all men do, then the Lord had not sent him. But if the earth opened and swallowed them alive, then they would know they had defied the Lord. In that instant, the ground split. The earth cracked open. Korah and his followers were swallowed alive. The people fled in terror. That day, Israel learned that God tolerates no rebellion. Years passed, 40 years in total. Israel wandered the wilderness. One generation died, another grew under God's provision. Egypt's slavery was now a distant memory. The people stood at the promised land's threshold, but before crossing the Jordan,
now
they needed
the
final
words given unto
instruction.
us. For
Moses
these
had one
truths
last
shall
lesson
guide
for
your
his
path
people.
through the wilderness and
Israel
beyond.
assembled. Thousands gathered before Moses, their faces eager, their hearts pounding. Then Moses spoke, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Hear, O Israel.
Love the Lord your
The
God
Lord
with
is our
all your
God.
heart,
The
with
Lord
all your
is
soul,
one.
and with all your strength. These words I command you today must be on your hearts. Teach them to your children. Speak them in your home when you lie down and
Heed
rise
my
up.
words, sons of Israel.
Bind them on your
For the
hands.
path ahead is
Write them on
fraught
your
with
foreheads,
unseen
for the Lord
perils.
is your God. There is no other." The people listened in silence, for Moses was not just speaking. He was imparting their very future. When they entered the land, he warned they must not forget the Lord, nor bow to Canaan's gods, nor break the covenant. If they forgot the Lord, if they rebelled against his law, curses would follow. But if they kept his commands, they would be blessed above all nations. They would live in houses they did not build, harvest vines they did not plant, and the Lord would fight for them, for he was their God, and they were his people. Moses gazed at the people, the faces of the children, the eyes of the elders, the hearts of the youth, and he knew his time had ended. For God had told him, "You will not cross the Jordan, you will not enter the land. Climb Mount Nebo, see the land from afar, but you will not enter it." Moses had led Israel for 40 years. He had witnessed God's power.
Son, I'm
He had
passing
spoken
this
with him face to
responsibility
face.
you.
But
Be
now he
strong
must
and
pass
courageous.
leadership to another.
Lead these people with wisdom.
God chose a new
Joshua,
leader, one
be
who would lead
strong and
Israel into
courageous,
battle,
for you shall bring
one
the
who would
Israelites
conquer
into
the
the land I
promised
swore
land.
to give them. I will
His
be with
name
you.
was Joshua. Moses called Joshua before the people, placing his hands on him, and declared, "Be strong and
My son,
courageous, for you
the
will
time
lead
has come
Israel
for you
into
to
the
lead our
promised
people.
land.
Be
The
strong
Lord
and
will go
courageous,
before you.
for the Lord your
He will
God
not
is with
fail
you.
you. He will not forsake you. Do not fear and do not falter." Joshua bowed his head. The people watched in silence. Israel had a new leader. Moses must climb the mountain never to return. Moses walked alone, ascending Mount Nebo. The wind whipped the summit. From there he saw the promised land, the Jordan River, Jericho's fields, Canaan's hills, the land God had sworn to Abraham. Moses beheld it, but did not cross, for his journey was complete. Moses breathed deeply, his eyes fixed on the horizon, and then God called him home. In the mountain solitude, in the presence of the Most High, Moses closed his eyes, and there atop Mount Nebo, Moses died. No funeral, no public mourning, for God himself buried him in an unknown valley. To this day, no one knows his grave. Israel wept for Moses. For 30 days they grieved. But then Joshua rose, took up his sword, looked toward the promised land, and God spoke, "My servant Moses is dead. Now arise, cross the Jordan, for the land I promised your fathers I now give to you. Be strong and courageous, for as I was with Moses, I will be with you." Thus ended Moses' life. He did not enter the land, but left an eternal legacy. But the law God gave him lived on, and his name was never forgotten.
Behold,
For never again did Israel have a prophet like Moses, one whom God knew face to face.
You brought us out here to die in this desert. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt?